Dankeschön, Cornelia. So, yeah, I'm sorry about my lack of German and very grateful to Christopher. And I will try to speak slowly enough for you to translate. I don't usually speak from notes, but because of translation, I'm going to try to stick to my script. So yeah, thank you so much, Cornelia, for inviting me here to talk to all of you. I mean, we started this movement by accident 14 years ago, and I couldn't imagine then that I would be talking to a whole room full of Play Street activists in Berlin. It really is quite amazing. So, do you want to just quickly?
Vielen Dank für die Einladung, Cornelia. Und als ich die Initiative damals genommen habe, um meine erste Spielstraße zu machen, hätte ich mir nie träumen lassen, dass das so groß werden würde. Und es war eigentlich mehr gar nicht gewollt, dass es so groß wird.
And I don't know if you said this because I didn't really understand any of what you said, but Cornelia came to visit me in Bristol, I think in 2018, and she was quite depressed about the state of things here, really wanting to get Play Street starting, and it was really difficult, and the council weren't being helpful, and you were quite, frustrated. So it's so nice to see what's happened in a very short space of time, and well done. I think amazing what you've done, really amazing. All of you. All of you. So I'm just going to start at the beginning of the story for me with all of this, which is my own childhood. So I grew up in Bristol in the southwest of England, which is like a medium-sized city. And I was lucky, I lived on a very small street, a no-through street, and we had a big tree at the end of my street, and one of my best childhood memories was climbing that tree and being hidden from adults with my next-door neighbour, my friend that lived next door, and we would just play spies and things like that. And I just still remember the feeling of excitement and adventure and independence and being away from adults and parents, even though we were like meters from our own front door. So this isn't me, actually. I found this on the internet, but it looks quite like me as a child. So the tree isn't there anymore from my childhood, but the memory is so strong, and it's really stayed with me, and I feel like those experiences really shaped me.
Also ich bin in einer mittelgroßen Stadt in England groß geworden, in Bristol. Und eine meiner schönsten Kindheitserinnerungen ist, dass ich in meiner unmittelbaren Nachbarschaft draußen auf einen Baum klettern konnte. Und diese Erinnerungen sind eigentlich immer bei mir geblieben.
So then as I grew older, my freedom grew, and from about the age of 8 or 9, I could go a couple of miles from my house to the shops or down to this space, which doesn't look very beautiful, but it was underneath, this road was built in the 1960s, and the space underneath, nobody planned it, but it was actually perfect for roller skating and playing, and we would all go down there, all ages, and play together. So I just want to show this because sometimes when people talk about children need to play outside more, people imagine that has to be beautiful green spaces and forests and, in touch with nature, which is important, but the most important space for children is the one they can get to, the one near where they live, where they can feel a sense of, this is my space, they can occupy that space and they can get there easily.
Also wie ich größer wurde, ist mein Aktionsradius immer größer geworden und ich habe das sehr genossen, versteckt vor den neugierigen Blicken irgendwelcher Erwachsene Streifzüge zu unternehmen. Und ich zeige dieses Foto, weil man denken würde, dass eigentlich zum Draußenspielen ein besonders schöner Ort gewünscht sein müsste. Aber eigentlich ist wichtig, dass der Ort für die Kinder erreichbar ist. Und hier unter dieser Unterführung war das so, das ist kein Ort, der speziell für Kinder hergerichtet wurde, aber hier konnte man herrlich spielen und Rollschuh laufen, zum Beispiel.
And we would play this as well. Do you have this here? We called it French skipping. But so I think did hands up here who played outside as a child in this way? So most people, yeah. So I think we would all agree that nobody planned for us to play out as children. It just happened naturally in the 70s and the 80s. But it gave us a huge amount of benefit. So it gave us physical activity. We were moving around without even thinking about it. It wasn't sport, it wasn't organized, but we were very active. We learned skills like cycling. We learned about real life, because real life happens in the street where you live, not in the playground so much. And we developed a sense of our community, belonging in our community, where we live, feeling part of that place, feeling connected to those people. And we made friends on the street with people who weren't necessarily in our class at school. You know, I had friends of all different ages, and boys and girls, and it was very different type of friendship from school friends. And we also had a lot of fun. So for children, this was something that was normal, and it was accessible to everybody. Every child had this experience and had all these benefits from it. So.
Also diese Straße hier, die war ja eigentlich für uns gar nicht geplant, um rauszugehen und dort zu spielen, aber so haben wir das damals gemacht und dort beim freien Spiel auf der Straße haben wir damals sehr viel gelernt. Wir haben uns bewegt, ohne dass uns das eigentlich bewusst war. Wir haben keine strukturierten Spiele gemacht, sondern uns einfach frei unter den Leuten bewegt. Wir haben unsere sozialen Kompetenzen geübt, Freundschaften geschlossen, auch über unsere Klasse hinaus. Und haben ein Gefühl dafür entwickelt, eigentlich, wo wir hingehören, wo unsere Nachbarschaft ist.
And it was free. It didn't cost anything, and it didn't rely on your parents to have a car to take you somewhere. So it was very democratic, and a way of all children having these benefits. Maybe you've already said this.
Das Allerwichtigste daran war eigentlich, dass es kostenfrei war. Wir konnten einfach auf die Straße gehen. Wir waren nicht abhängig von unseren Eltern, dass sie uns dahin bringen. Und in dem Sinne war es ein sehr demokratischer Ort.
But even then, in the hazy, good old days, oh, hold on a minute. Missed a slide. So even then, some people were starting to realize that children were at risk of losing this, that cars in particular were starting to take over the space that children had used. So Colin Ward is an English writer who was talking about this. He wrote this book, The Child in the City. Jane Jacobs in New York in the 60s. And there's another guy called Mayer Hillman, also in the UK, that was talking a lot about this. So a few voices were starting to sound the alarm for children, even then.
Schon damals, also 1978, war dieser Colin Ward, der in New York war, als warnende Stimme, dass die Autofahrer diesen Raum, den die Kinder zum Spielen nutzen, eigentlich immer weiter einschränken würden.
But nobody listened. So children's needs were forgotten and children's rights were trampled over in the rush for progress, for economic development.
Die Rechte der Kinder wurden aber vergessen und in der Hast für wirtschaftliches Wachstum wurden sie einfach beiseite geschoben.
And where all this was heading is where we are now. So children's time outside, their outdoor play, their freedom, their independence has all all shrunk a lot. So this map kind of illustrates that. And it shows 4 generations of one family in another English city, Sheffield. And the big blob is the range that the great-grandfather had. And then the blobs get smaller and smaller through the generations until the son, who's now, the child now, he can only go to on his own street, basically.
Auf dieser Karte ist gezeigt, wie in verschiedenen Generationen die Aktionsradien der verschiedenen Familienmitglieder wie die abgesteckt waren. Der Großvater, der hat sich in diesem großen Zirkel bewegt und der Urgroßvater, der Großvater in diesem kleineren und jetzt die Mutter dort oben und der kleine Sohn ist eigentlich nur noch punktuell an diesen Orten.
Aged 8, I should have said. This was when they were aged 8, each
Oh,
of them.
okay, ja, das habe ich vergessen. Das ist also wichtig. Das war also der Aktionsradius von den 8-jährigen Kindern zu der jeweiligen Zeit.
So that's a general pattern that is shrunk. And the other thing that we've done to children is we've contained them in these spaces. So we've said, you can play here in this contained space. Everywhere else, that's not for you. This is where you go. And I don't know if it's the same here so much, but in the UK, there's a very strong pressure on parents that you take your children to these spaces. You stay with them, you watch them, and then you take them home again. So it's very, very different from what we grew up with. And the statistics show that children just don't play outside like they used to. So this is a bit difficult to see, but showing that adults who are like in their 50s now, most of us played out. Over 80% played outside regularly as children, whereas children now, it's about 27%, and I think that's probably an overestimate, actually.
Auf dieser Statistik ist zu sehen, wie verschiedene Generationen von Menschen erzählen, wie viel Anteil ihrer Freizeit sie draußen verbracht haben. Und man sieht ganz deutlich, dass die kontemporären Kinder nur noch 30% der Zeit draußen spielen.
And I'll let this slide speak for itself. It's quite shocking, but you can translate it. Oh, 3/4 of children.
3/4 der Kinder verbringen weniger Zeit draußen als Gefangene im Gefängnis.
That was from a UK study a few years ago. And all this obviously is lots of impact on children's lives, but a very important one is on their physical activity levels. So if we're not outside, we're not moving around, we're not playing, we're not getting to places, we are less active. And the statistics show this. They're really shocking. So this is the statistics in the UK. This was pre-COVID, and then during the pandemic, it got even worse. So it's very, very bad. And actually, I checked the German statistics, and you're a little bit better. About between 25% and 30% of children get the minimum amount of physical activity that they need, but it's still quite bad, right?
Also die Statistiken zeigen ganz deutlich, dass diese Einschränkung der freien Bewegung der Kinder dazu führt, dass heutzutage nur noch 17,5% der Kinder die Mindestzeit an 60 Minuten freier Bewegung und körperlicher Aktivität bekommen. Und diese Zahlen sind für Deutschland ähnlich und im Zuge der Corona-Pandemie eigentlich noch schlechter geworden.
And the impact of this is much worse for children from lower socioeconomic groups because they don't have so much compensation. Then they're less likely to have outside space, a garden, or be taken to paid for activities or sports clubs, that kind of thing.
Und dieser Befund ist eigentlich noch schwerwiegender für Kinder, die in benachteiligten Zirkeln oder Kreisen aufwachsen, die zum Beispiel nicht das Glück haben, dass sie an Sportaktivitäten teilnehmen können oder Ähnlichem.
And even for children who do have these other activities, it hasn't compensated for just the loss of freedom to be outside.
Und trotzdem sind Kinder, die Zugang zu diesen Sportaktivitäten haben, wiegt es trotzdem nicht auf, dass sie diesen Verlust an Freiheit.
Yeah, and it's having real public health impact. So in the UK now, 1 in 3 children leaves primary school overweight or obese.
Der Befund hat sehr starke Einfluss oder Konsequenzen für die Gesundheit der Kinder und es führt dazu, dass viele Kinder übergewichtig sind.
And children's mental health is the worst it's ever been as well. Yeah. I mean, we can't necessarily put all this down to children's loss of freedom to play out, but I think it is safe to say that it has had a significant impact. So, why are children not outside as much? What's changed? According to the media, it's mostly parents that are to blame. So either parents are too overprotective, so what we call cotton wool parenting in English. So that's what the media says, that it's parents being too overprotective, too worried to let their children out of sight, or parents are too lazy to take their children to the park every day after school. And then children are also blamed for being just addicted to screens, for not wanting to go outside. There's, if I could get the other headline back, there are media headlines basically saying children prefer to stay inside than to go outside. But as far as I'm concerned, that is not the problem. That's not the main problem. And what's being ignored is that the outside environment has changed a lot for children and has become more hostile. This isn't working.
Whilst this gets to work. So alles fragt, warum, nach den Gründen, warum die Kinder sich weniger draußen bewegen. Und oft werden die Eltern dafür verantwortlich gemacht, die in England nicht Helikoptereltern genannt werden, sondern Baumwolleneltern, wenn ich das jetzt richtig genau übersetze. Und es werden andere Faktoren dafür verantwortlich gemacht, dass Kinder zu viel am Bildschirm sind oder auch gar nicht rausgehen wollen. Aber Alice möchte zeigen, dass es auch andere Gründe dafür gibt.
Okay, so this is illustrating the outside environment for children has changed a lot. And in particular, cars are the main enemy of children's ability to go outside. In many studies, it's shown that the main thing that's stopping parents from giving their children more freedom is fear about cars and traffic. So there's a few quotes and statistics there. One is, we did a research project with British Cycling a few years ago, and they found that 88% of parents said they would be more likely to teach their children to ride a bike if the streets felt safer. So that was what's stopping them. And parents say that traffic danger is the #1 fear that they have about letting their children play out.
Der Hauptgrund, warum Eltern eigentlich ihre Kinder nicht rausgehen lassen wollen, ist die Angst vor dem Verkehr draußen.
So in the UK and maybe here as well, all of the road safety campaigns from the government has very much focused their attention on children, putting the responsibility onto children to keep themselves safe. This is the Green Cross man. He was a big part of my childhood. But we all learned, we absorbed this idea that we needed to stay away from roads, be very careful around roads. All the responsibility was on us and not on drivers. And that's still the case. We're still told children need to wear high-vis and keep themselves safe. And the UK government, and maybe here as well, they really like to say that the streets have become so much safer because the statistics kind of show that. The number of children killed on the streets has reduced over the years, which is good, obviously, but when you look more closely at why, then you realize it's not necessarily because the streets have become safer. it's because children are not outside as much. So we've absorbed this idea that the roads are dangerous, and they've become more dangerous as a result. And so parents keep their children close, they transport them to places, and children are just not in the way of traffic as much as they used to be. And yet, this is in the UK, 30 children a week are still killed or seriously injured when they're out on foot or on bicycles. So the problem hasn't gone away, and the danger hasn't gone away, and it still needs to be dealt with. And again, it's children from the most disadvantaged backgrounds who are most affected by this. So this is a really awful statistic, but do you want to read it in German? Or?
Also es gibt das Paradoxon, dass eigentlich die absoluten Zahlen von verkehrsverletzten Kindern eigentlich immer weiter runtergeht. Aber wenn man genauer in die Statistiken reinguckt, dann sieht man, dass eigentlich dass es immer noch, dass es nicht daran liegt, dass die Straßen sicherer geworden sind, sondern dass das daran liegt, dass immer weniger Kinder auf den Straßen spielen. Und insbesondere in Gegenden, wo Armut verbreitet ist oder wo die Kinder nicht so viel drin sein können und immer noch auf der Straße spielen, kommt es zu sehr vielen verletzten Kindern.
So these images are from somebody called Tom Flood, who, if anyone's on Twitter or Instagram, I would follow him. He's brilliant. And he uses like car advertising. He used to be an advertiser to just show the imbalance between cars and children very clearly. So those are some of his images. And he also asks the question, who has sacrificed the most, children or cars? So this is a list of things children have sacrificed for drivers. On the left, so playing on their street, walking to school, cycling to school, crossing the road, lots of things, independence, and things drivers have sacrificed for children.
Also eine Liste an Dingen, die Kinder für den Verkehr aufgegeben haben, und die ist sichtbar länger als die Liste, die der Verkehr für Kinder aufgegeben hat.
And there is also a vicious cycle in this, where the less children are out on the streets, the less drivers are thinking about children, being careful, looking out, and also the less policymakers are thinking about children and making spaces and streets better for children.
Das Ganze ist eigentlich wie ein Teufelskreis, und da jetzt auch immer weniger Kinder auf den Straßen sind, sind sie weniger sichtbar und auch für Politiker weniger sichtbar und für Autofahrer auch. Die passen dann nicht mehr so auf und haben die Kinder nicht im Kopf.
Yeah, so this is everything that I was thinking about in 2009 when my children were little and facing all of this as a parent. What do we do about it? And my friends and I locally, and particularly my neighbour, we started talking about what can we do? It's not fair, the cars and our children can't play out. And we want to do something about it. We're not okay to just accept this.
Meine Nachbarin und ich, wir wollten das, als unsere Kinder klein waren, nicht akzeptieren, diese Situation, und wollten etwas ändern.
So we started thinking, what's the simplest thing we can do, which is within our power? And me and my neighbour Amy, who's an artist, started thinking about our own street and what would make this space available to children. And we realised that it was about taking away the danger of cars, basically.
Meine Freundin Amy und ich, wir haben darüber nachgedacht, wie wir unsere Straße den Kindern zugänglich machen könnten, und sind darauf gekommen, dass das Wichtigste ist, die Autos wegzunehmen.
So we applied to the local council, to just close the road to cars for a few hours, one day after school. And we decided to not organise anything else. So we had street parties in the past with food and music and lots of things, and we decided what we want to do was keep it very, very simple and just make the space safe and see what would happen.
Es gibt in England die Tradition von großen Straßenpartys, aber wir wollten eigentlich eine ganz, ganz einfache Straße nur haben und es ganz einfach halten.
So we also got our neighbours to wear high vis and volunteer to steward each end of the street to keep it safe, and to also, so it's different from what you do here, but we decided to allow people to still keep their cars on the street, and to, if they needed to drive out or in during the play street. So the job of the stewards was also to walk in front of any cars that needed to move to make sure it was safe. Oh, you do that.
Also es war bei uns in England so, dass wir auch mit den Nachbarn viel geredet haben und da auch drauf gekommen sind, dass wir die Autofahrer, den Anwohnern immer noch erlauben, ihre Autos mit Schrittgeschwindigkeit rein und raus zu fahren.
Yeah. And only out. Ah. So yeah, and also to say it was very important. The first thing we did was talk to our neighbours and make sure that people were supportive of the idea. We didn't just do it. So yeah, and then the impact, as any of you have done this, know, was like a magic wand had been waved, and children just came out of nowhere. It felt like we counted 80 children on the street, and that was a lot more than we thought lived on the street. So it just felt like they came out of nowhere to fill the space.
Es war wie eine Zauberei, dass auf einmal so viele Kinder auf der Straße waren, von denen wir gar nicht wussten, dass so viele in unserer Straße wohnen.
And the magic of it really was that we didn't add anything. We didn't organize any games. We didn't organize any activities. We didn't provide any equipment apart from maybe some chalk. And we just took away the thing that was stopping children from using that space, which was traffic. And Amy, who's an artist, she called it removal art.
Also ein wichtiger Punkt war, dass wir nichts speziell für die Kinder organisiert haben. Wir haben sie einfach spielen lassen, und meine Freundin Amy sagte dazu, das wäre eigentlich die Kunst, etwas wegzunehmen, nämlich das Auto, was die Kinder davon abgehalten hat, auf der Straße zu spielen.
And what was amazing to see was how naturally the children played. It was like they did it every day. They just came out and played together, all ages, all backgrounds, and nobody needed to tell them what to do. They just played for 3 hours non-stop.
Es war großartig zu sehen, wie selbstverständlich die Kinder auf der Straße über alle Altersgrenzen hinweg gespielt haben.
And I remember Amy and I noticing that evening after the first play street just how tired our children were, and that they were really quiet and really calm, and they went to bed and they slept, and it was like, it was, a light bulb moment.
Die Kinder sind nach der Spielstraße einfach, ohne großen Ärger zu machen, ins Bett gegangen.
This is what they need every day. So then other parents locally on other streets just started hearing about the idea and asking us, how do we do it? So we just started informally helping some other streets to do the same, and found the same magic happened on every street. So you take away the cars and children come and they play and they have a great time, and the adults love it as well, and they get to meet each other and talk. Can't tell if that's going on. Oh, there we go. So all different kinds of streets, different kinds of communities, and the same thing happened.
Das Wort sprach sich sehr schnell herum, und es gab immer mehr Nachbarschaften, die eine Spielstraße machen wollten, und auch die Erwachsenen fanden es toll, weil sie sich begegnen konnten und miteinander reden konnten und sich kennenlernen konnten.
So then the next thing that happened was the council started to take an interest and realised that this is something that's actually getting children moving and bringing communities together, and actually all we have to do is give permission, and the residents on the street will do all the work. So what's not to like?
An dieser Stelle wurde das Bezirksamt aktiv und fand, dass es eigentlich eine sehr einfache Sache war, weil man eigentlich nur die Anwohner darin unterstützen musste und keine weiteren Bemühungen machen musste.
So they brought in this policy called Temporary Play Street Order, which we call radical paperwork, because it was very unusual for a council to do this kind of thing. I don't know if it's like that here, but the local councils... Yeah, well, in the UK, they like to have control over everything. They don't really like to give permission for people to change things themselves, and they don't like to take risks. So this was actually amazing that they did this, because it was both those things. It was taking risk, and it was giving permission to people to take control of their own street.
Es war eigentlich etwas Ungewöhnliches für das Bezirksamt, dieses Risiko einzugehen, den Anwohnern die Erlaubnis zu geben, so etwas zu machen. Aber jetzt gibt es.
And then the next thing, because of that, we got national media coverage. So people started hearing about the idea all over the UK, and people started getting in touch with us. I think we must have had an email address or something, and people started getting in touch with us and saying, how do we make this happen in our city where we live? So lots of people all over the UK started contacting us. And that was the point we decided we better set this up as an organisation. So a few of us got together and we started Playing Out as an organisation to support people to do this.
Nachdem die Nachrichten über unsere Spielstraße berichtet haben, haben wir Anfragen aus ganz England bekommen, wie wir das machen und wie wir das organisieren können. Und an der Stelle organisierten wir uns dann zu einer kleinen Initiative Playing Out.
And we just put everything that we knew on a website, so it was free to anyone to use.
Wir haben dann alles, was wir wussten, wie wir das gemacht haben, auf die Webseite gestellt.
And since then, I mean, to cut a long story short, the movement has grown across the UK. We've done a lot of work, and local organisations and local people, activators, have done a lot. And there are now over 1,500 streets across the UK that have done this. And over 90 local councils across the UK have a policy now to support it. 275 streets in Bristol have played out.
Also es gibt jetzt über 1500 Spielstraßen und 90 Bezirke, die eine Gesetzgebung haben, die es erlaubt, Spielstraßenanordnungen auszustellen.
And each of these streets is, we roughly estimate about 30 children, 15 adults, and hours of play, of physical activity for children. And altogether, we think it's resulted in about 1 million extra hours of physical play for children across the UK. Right. And it's spread internationally. So this is Australia, and if you look on our website, there's a page of international Play Street movement, and it's spread to a lot of countries, including here, which is amazing. So it feels like the same need is everywhere. Children need the same thing, and parents want it as well. And we're starting to get some good evidence of the impact, so for children's health, for communities, and for wider change. So for children, the University of Bristol did a study and found that children were up to 5 times more physically active at a play street than a normal day after school. So it's very significant for children's physical activity.
Die Briten, die haben das wissenschaftlich begleitet, und es gibt tatsächlich harte Fakten, dass das sehr gut für die Kinder ist. Es stärkt die Bewegung. Die Kinder bewegen sich 5-mal mehr auf einer Spielstraße, als sie es sonst in ihrem Alltag tun. Und es stärkt auch vor allem die nachbarschaftlichen Gemeinschaften auch.
And we've also got very good evidence about the community building side of it. And this was a report from Newcastle University, which found actually it was really helping to reduce loneliness and isolation by just bringing everybody out into the space together.
Die Universität Newcastle konnte herausfinden, dass es vor allem auch die Einsamkeit von Kindern beschränkt und einschränkt. Also
And also children are learning to ride bikes and it's helping towards what we call active travel, so walking, cycling, just making streets better for people, basically. Starting to shift people's thinking about what streets are for, and also, on a practical level, it's a space where children can learn to ride a bike.
Es befördert auch die aktive Beförderung, die aktive Bewegung durch die Stadt und zeigt auf, wofür Straßen eigentlich sonst noch gebraucht werden können, außer Verkehr.
I can't tell whether this is going or not. It's quite slow. Oh, there we go. Oh, probably gone too far now. So all of these reasons, all this impact for children's health, for community, for active travel, for wider change, these all help to get political support for play streets. But the other things that we found councils particularly like about play streets is that it's very low cost, it costs them very little, it's very simple, residents do all the work, and it's inclusive, it's for everybody. So it's kind of exactly what they want to see happen.
Alice sagt, dass die Behörden eigentlich immer sehr unterstützend sind, weil es sie nichts kostet und die Initiative oft von den Bürgern der Stadt ausgeht, die das auf ihre eigene Initiative durchführen.
And in terms of, just quickly to say what's kind of made it work, or what makes it work, there are a few key ingredients. So the main ingredients are people who want to do it, and a supportive local authority that allows you to do it. But also, we've found some people need much more support than others. So it's really important if you want to grow this and make it equitable, accessible to everybody, that there is some direct support for streets, and particularly where they need it more. And generally, where people need more support, children need to play out even more. So it's doubly important to have that support.
Also, was sind die wichtigsten Zutaten, damit es Spielstraßen geben kann? Das sind natürlich einmal die Anwohner, die das initiieren wollen, und man braucht eine Behörde, die das unterstützt. Und es gibt aber auch Gegenden, die Unterstützung von außen brauchen. Und es ist meistens so, dass dort, wo die Kinder insbesondere stark eingeschränkt sind und sich weniger bewegen, dort Gegenden besonders viel Unterstützung brauchen, um so etwas zu initiieren.
So in the UK, we've done a lot of work to try and work out what people need to do this in the places where they face the most challenges and where children need it most. And we've also developed models that are not on streets, they're more in high-rise tower blocks, but still using the space where they live. And the important thing to say is, even in these places where there's a lot of support given, it's still doing it with people who live there. It's not coming in and doing it to them. It's doing it alongside.
Es gibt auch Modelle, wo das gar nicht so sehr auf der Straße ist, sondern in so Wohnsiedlungen. Aber wichtig bleibt auf jeden Fall, dass man diese Spielstraßen mit den Anwohnern initiiert und nicht die Spielstraßen sozusagen obtruiert auf die Leute.
So if anyone's interested in that side of it, if anyone works with communities, we've produced a toolkit for sort of using play streets as community development tool. And there's lots and lots of learning in there from lots of work that's been done all over the UK. So the other thing that you probably come up against if you've done play streets is not everybody likes it, and so you have to be equipped to respond to those questions that keep coming up. So why don't you just take them to the park? Roads are for cars. Is it safe to teach children to play on the street? Why the street? So we've got a lot of stuff on the website that responds to those questions or those concerns. But we've also got a list of 10 reasons why children need to play on the street where they live, which I won't go into all of them, but I think it's important to remember if you're facing opposition, children have a right to play. It's in the UN Charter for Children's Rights. And they need to be able to play near home, immediately outside where they live. They shouldn't have to go somewhere, go off to a special place. It's that doorstep space which is really important. And they need to play with other children. Okay, they might have a back garden or a small yard, but it's not fun playing by yourself. They need the community space to play with other children. So anyway, there's lots of reasons why the street and that immediate space is particularly important for children. It's also the first step to independence. So if they have access to that space on their doorstep, then they can start to gain more independence, more freedom from that.
Also es gibt auch eine Opposition, die die Spielstraßen nicht gut finden und die bringen eigentlich in England genau dieselben Argumente vor wie hier in Berlin. Aber der wichtigste Grund dafür, dass für Spielstraßen ist eigentlich, dass die Kinder ein Recht haben zu spielen und dass die Kinder in ihrer unmittelbaren Nähe spielen können, damit sie sozusagen halb beaufsichtigt dort sein können und schnell nach Hause gehen können und dann wieder selbstständig draußen spielen können.
And the other argument is streets make up most of the public space in the city, so it should be for everybody.
Straßen nehmen eigentlich den meisten Platz in den Städten ein und deswegen sollten die Straßen eigentlich für alle sein.
So we think play streets are wonderful and they have all this immediate benefits for children, for communities, and they're also starting to shift people's thinking about children, about streets, and to build more of a culture where it's normal for children to be outside and play outside. So that's the real value of play streets for us. It's showing what's needed and what's possible.
Also wichtig ist an den Spielstraßen, dass man zeigen kann, wie selbstverständlich man den Raum einnehmen kann und dass das ein Anfang ist, sozusagen die Spielstraßen, um das auszuweiten.
So some of the things that play streets show, which we want politicians to take notice of, are that children want to play outside. When they're given the opportunity, they choose to do that. So it's completely dispelling the myth that children want to just be on their phones all the time. They just don't have the choice normally. So when you give them the choice, they choose to play outside.
Etwas, was wir unseren Politikern immer wieder sagen oder mitgeben wollen, ist, dass Kinder draußen spielen wollen und sie das auch nutzen, sobald sie die Gelegenheit dazu haben.
And also parents want this for their children, which, play streets clearly show that. Many parents want it so much that they're prepared to put a lot of work and effort into making it possible. Thirdly,
Eltern wollen auch, dass die Kinder draußen spielen. Und jetzt kommt das Dritte.
So the main factor that makes it possible for children to play out is safe space close to where they live and permission to use that space. So we've also found there are some places, particularly in housing estates, where the space is physically safe, but children are prevented from using it by rules or by adult concerns taking precedence, people wanting peace and quiet, and they don't want to hear the sound of children playing. So that's the other factor, is that children are allowed to use the space.
Es ist wichtig, dass der Ort sicher ist und dass die Kinder die Erlaubnis haben, auch dort zu spielen.
We skipped a few slides. Anyway, I'll just say the other key learning from play streets. Is it going to go back? Anyway, the other one is that streets are a perfect space for children to play if they're made safe. And so we really want. Oh, there we go.
Straßen sind der ideale Ort zum Spielen, wenn sie von gefährlichem Verkehr befreit sind.
So we really want policymakers to take notice of these things and to realise how important it is that children have this this ability to play outside where they live, that is restored to children, not just on a temporary basis, but permanently. And that means changing the environment on a permanent basis.
Wir wollen eigentlich, dass unsere Politiker verstehen, dass diese Vorteile für Kinder nicht nur die Kinder betreffen, sondern eigentlich die gesamte Gemeinschaft und dass das eigentlich die ganze Stadt aus dieser Perspektive der Kinder geplant sein sollte.
So some of the things that we're doing to build on play streets at a policy change level is we are developing a report which says children should be placed at the centre of transport policy. So it shouldn't be about cyclists, about walkers. Focus on children, and then everything will come from that. If you make streets good for children, they'll be good for everybody.
Wir sagen unseren Politikern, dass sie bei der Planung von Straßen das Kind in den Mittelpunkt stellen sollen und aus der Perspektive des Kindes planen sollten und eigentlich resultiert dafür ein Vorteil für alle.
So this is like a vision of what we'd like to see in the future. This is actually from COVID, when there were no cars on the street, and children just came out and they were there and they were using that space. So it just shows it's possible, and that is something that we should all work towards together. Who doesn't want streets that are better for children, better for everybody, healthy, safe, active, and full of life?
Das hier ist. Achso, ja. Ja, verstanden.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Very sticky.
Ja. Vielen Dank, Alice. Hört man das? Ja. Thank you very much, Alice, for these amazing impressions from Great Britain. Are there any questions? Hat irgendjemand noch eine Frage? Ich gehe mal. Ja.
Wie oft finden diese Spielstraßen statt? Wöchentlich, monatlich?
How often do you organize the play
Yeah,
streets?
sorry, I forgot to say that. So when the policy was brought in, they said you could do it up to once a week, so maximum once a week. Yeah, that's still the most. We would obviously like it to be whenever you want, that would be better.
Hi again, Alice.
Hello.
Hi. I have two questions. My first question is, you started by telling us about your own childhood, and you told us that a key component was being free of adult supervision. But when you then outline play streets, you are also talking about stewards, and there are 30 kids and 15 stewards. And there's a bit of a paradox there. And I was wondering if you've been thinking about how to reduce the impact of adults and adult supervision. We have a similar problem here. Well, we just need people to actually block traffic, and that takes adults to do that. But what are they doing in terms of internally? What are they doing towards the play street themselves? And my second question is, what the last thing you said was about making the state of play street permanent. And I was wondering about how your experience were there. You have a big movement. There are thousands of play streets. So how many of them were successful in actually turning this state of affairs into a permanent one?
Good, very good questions. Do you need to translate? No. No. So, so on the first question about adult supervision.
Also,
Yeah.
Florian basically asked.
No, he said it in English.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Also, Florian sah das Paradox aus, dass die Spielstraßen ja immer noch ein bisschen beaufsichtigt sind, nämlich von den Spielstraßenlotsen, und fragte, ob das an irgendwelchen Spielstraßen aufgelöst ist, und fragt, ob es in England Bestrebungen gibt oder erfolgreiche Beispiele dafür, dass die temporären Spielstraßen zu permanenten Spielstraßen umgewidmet wurden.
Yeah, so on adult supervision was the first question. Yeah, I mean, that's the long-term goal, I suppose, is that we create a culture where it's more normal and acceptable and feels safe for parents to supervise less. But in terms of the play street, we feel it's the job of the adults is just to create a safe space, not to be like hovering over children and managing them at all. So that's usually what happens, actually, is that adults are quite out of sight, and they're just maybe one or two people at each end of the street stopping the cars, and then other adults might be on the street, but they tend to be just talking to each other. Is this very echoey, or is it just where I'm standing? Yeah, no, that's better. Yeah, so does that make sense? But it's about partly about building confidence in parents that they can let go a bit more. So we have seen that with some parents on play streets. They start off very nervous, and the more they see other parents being more like relaxed, it's kind of infectious. Like
Wir versuchen eigentlich, die Erwachsenen und die Lotsen so uns wirklich zurückzunehmen und den Kindern den Raum zu überlassen. Und wenn die Eltern anfänglich immer noch ein bisschen ängstlich sind, gewinnen sie eigentlich sehr schnell an Zuversicht, dass die Kinder selbstständig spielen können. Und dann sind die Erwachsenen eigentlich unter sich immer öfters.
But I think it's a really big question about the sort of the parental concern and parental fear, because some of it is based in reality. You know, it is dangerous for children to be out in the streets, and they could get killed by a car. And some of it's more generalized fear that's maybe not so based in reality. But it's all jumbled up together, so it's difficult to separate it out. What was the second part of the question?
Whether you were successful in
permanent play streets. So one thing that has happened is that on the streets that are already quite quiet, less traffic dominated, we found that through doing regular play streets, it's just built up enough of a culture and enough confidence in parents to let their children play out every day. They don't necessarily need to close the road, so they can just play on the pavement or in a quieter street. We've seen, I would say, a handful of streets that have gone on to do more physical changes in the street. It's not easy to do that in the UK. Like I said, councils allowing play streets, it's a very unusual thing. In general, councils don't like to allow people to do things for themselves. We do have a more top-down approach to making streets safer now, called low-traffic neighbourhoods, where the street is closed to cars, but it's still open to people walking and cycling. So it's a bit similar to some things you have here. Those have been very controversial, those permanent changes. Drivers don't like them, and it's been a very toxic debate about streets. So one thing that we're saying is, if you start with play streets or something that's very unthreatening, you know, it's just temporary, it's short, you're not telling anybody that they can't use their cars, it can help build up more support for those permanent changes. But does that answer the question?
Also Alice hat erzählt, dass in manchen ruhigeren Straßen sich die Spielstraße ein bisschen verselbstständigt hat und sich eine Kultur entwickelt hat, wo die Eltern dann ihre Kinder auch rausschicken und die Kinder sozusagen auch an Tagen, wo keine temporäre Spielstraße ist, auch selbstständig spielen. Und zu den permanenten Spielstraßen sagt Alice, dass das wiederum die Umwidmung von temporären zu permanenten Straßen nicht so einfach ist und dass es dort in England auch ähnlich wie hier ein Top-Down Ansatz gibt, wo der sozusagen, ja, der aber auch für sehr viel Kontroversen und eigentlich sogar auch ähnlich wie hier eine toxische Diskussion verursacht hat. Und stattdessen diese temporären Straßen, mit denen ist man sehr erfolgreich, weil die Autofahrer insbesondere das Gefühl haben, dass man ihnen nichts wegnimmt.
Gibt es noch weitere Fragen?
Hi, thank you very much. What's your experience in sort of expanding this concept of a play street towards a community or a neighborhood street? I know you've touched on the low traffic neighborhood streets, but in your experience, is that something that happens organically? So if you open the street for kids, maybe teenagers, elderly people, other people who might feel isolated or want more community come? Or is it something that needs additional offers or additional sort of work to make that happen?
Yeah, so I think a bit of both. It does happen naturally, but also you can do things to try and make sure that everybody feels it's for them. So we encourage people, when they're making their publicity on their street, to make it really clear it's for everybody. It's not just for parents and children. And to say things like, bring a cup of tea, or, bring a chair out, or maybe provide some chairs for older people to sit down, things like that are just really sending the message that this is not just for parents and children, it's for the whole community. But yeah, there's lots, actually in the toolkit that I talked about, there's lots of ideas about that, like how to make it more inclusive.
Die Frage ging in die Richtung, was Alice' Erfahrungen sind, über die Spielstraße hinauszudenken und sozusagen ganze Gemeinschaften da heranzuführen, dass ihnen die Straße gehört und auch nicht nur Kinder in den Mittelpunkt zu stellen, sondern auch alle anderen Menschen, die in dem Viertel wohnen. Und Alice sagt, das verweist auf den Leitfaden, den sie geschrieben hat, wo sehr viele Erfahrungen dazu beschrieben sind, und sagt, dass viele Spielstraßen dazu übergegangen sind, nicht nur die Eltern und die Kinder einzuladen, sondern wirklich alle, und so Angebote machen oder die Leute auffordern, ihre Tasse Tee mitzubringen und einfach dort zu verweilen.
Yeah, we've also found like young people and retired people can be really good for stewards because they're not having to look after young children at the same time. So inviting those people to kind of come and help is really good as well.
Alice erzählt, dass sie gute Erfahrungen damit gemacht hat, Menschen, die ihr Arbeitsleben hinter sich haben, dass die besonders gerne auch als Lotsen arbeiten, dass das in England sehr gut klappt. Und ja.
Would love to double down on that because I also think it's one of the most interesting aspects of these play streets, that it can work as an inclusive environment for people to meet each other, which they don't do regularly anywhere. I mean, there's no space for people, and no time for people to meet in the neighborhood. So I actually like the fact that they are temporary, that they are not permanent, because if they're permanent, they are like a Fußgängerzone, so this pedestrian area, which is not a time for people to meet. At the same time, I would say we have struggled to do it beyond the parents and the kids. So usually it is the parents who come with their kids. So it's not really this meeting space any yet. So even after 4 years of doing it. Yeah. So I would love to hear some of the things that you put in your list of things that help to make that happen.
Yeah, specific things have been maybe do more of a party one day with food, cake, like tea and cake tends to get people out more, so they've got a reason to be there. Also asking older people to come specifically and share their memories of games that they played and like teach games to children. Just things like that just really help give people a reason to be there more.
Die Frage oder der Kommentar ging dahin, wenn ich dich richtig verstanden habe, dass du eigentlich sagtest, dass das Temporäre eigentlich ein wichtiger Aspekt ist, weil es sozusagen auch zeitlich einen Rahmen stellt, wann die Leute sich begegnen können, wenn ich dich richtig verstanden habe. Und, sorry. Please go ahead, I've forgotten what you said.
I was just going to say you could also experiment with calling it something different. So it doesn't have to be a play street. And we've had some streets in the UK, they just call it community street instead of a play street. So you can play with the language as well to make it clear that it's not just about children. But having said that, there's something about having children at the heart of it which does help bring people out and bring people together. It's like a glue, like children playing can be a glue for
Es gibt also in England Spielstraßen, die sich nicht so nennen, sondern eher Gemeinschaftsstraßen nennen, um wirklich alle Leute zu erreichen und einzuladen. Und Alice erzählt, dass es eigentlich eine schöne Erfahrung ist, alle Generationen zusammenzubringen, weil auch die älteren Menschen den jüngeren Kindern die Spiele von früher beibringen und weitererzählen. Aber sie sagt, es ist eigentlich eine Erfahrung, dass wenn man die Kinder in den Mittelpunkt stellt, dass das sozusagen ein Zugpferd ist, um das Ganze zu starten.
And the group that we don't tend to see very much at Play Streets is like older teenagers, because they don't really necessarily want to be around adults and children, and they've got, they do tend to have more freedom, so they can go to their own spaces a bit further away. But some teenagers enjoy it, and they like helping with the children, and so I think it's just giving the message that it's not just for one group of people, it's, it is for everybody, and everybody's invited.
Habt ihr das nicht verstanden? Teenager, die sind irgendwie außen vor. Die interessieren sich nicht so sehr für die Spielstraßen, auch in England nicht.
Gut, sind alle Fragen geklärt, oder?
Concerning the density of population around the Play Street, it's natural that if you have a rural area with just little 5 family houses and a dead-end street, that children play there. That was my playing environment, actually. How are the experience with the Play Streets in more dense populated, more metropolitan areas where you have 5-story buildings and I think also less of the social network in the street. It's just my impression that the pictures I saw, that the people in these houses, they know each other, and you have more this social ground for having a Play Street. How are the experience in, London, just in the inner city? I
mean, in the UK, we don't really have dense housing in the same way. It's much more spread out. So, I mean, we have tower blocks, like 20-story tower blocks, which I showed a photo of children playing in that space outside the tower blocks, and that works really well because there's a lot of children in a small amount of space. And on streets, they do tend to be house, just one family per house. So the numbers aren't huge, on a street. But, it's as long as there's enough support, the majority of people want it. It doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter. There don't have to be hundreds of people to make it successful. It's about meeting the people you live with, on your street. And a lot of those streets, they might look like people are really connected, but some of that has come through doing the Play Streets. They didn't necessarily know each other before, and we've had a lot of feedback from people saying they didn't know any of their neighbours before, and now they know lots of neighbours, and they feel much more at home and safe, and they know who they live, who lives on their street, and they trust people. So, and that helps parents as well to be able to let their children play out more.
Also die Frage ging in die Richtung, ob es einen Unterschied macht, ob die Spielstraßen in einer in einer dicht besiedelten Stadt eigentlich stattfinden oder so, wie alles auf den Fotos gezeigt, eher in diesen Reihenhaussiedlungen, wo es eigentlich erwarten würde, dass es nicht so dicht ist und schon von vornherein gute nachbarschaftliche Verbindungen existieren. Aber Alice sagt eigentlich, dass auch in diesen Reihenhaussiedlungen die nachbarschaftliche Verbindung erst durch die Spielstraße erschaffen wurde und dass es eigentlich nicht so einen großen Unterschied macht, wo die Spielstraße stattfindet, ob in Siedlungen, in dicht besiedelten Städten oder in diesen Vorstadtsiedlungen. Solange die Leute daran ein Interesse haben, kann man das eigentlich initiieren und schafft eigentlich immer einen positiven Vibe.
I understood that.
Gibt es noch weitere Fragen? Gut. Dann, thank you very much, Alice. It was amazing.